Yeah, and so that starts to get me really thinking about what exactly is going on up in Canada and how is Trump going to deal with this.
Tell me a little bit about what you know about the Bank of England and the International Bank of Settlements.
So a lot of what I know specifically about the Bank of England is based on their sort of founding history, their history through the 1800s, 1900s, and the thing about the International Bank of Settlements, there's sort of this trifecta going on, and anyone who's read Confessions of an Economic Hitman will be familiar with the system to a certain extent. That was written by John Perkins, who is a famous CIA operative that is now basically a whistleblower on how this financial cartel works on the global scale, where it's been put in place slowly over time, and the details are extremely complex, but between the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the International Bank of Settlements, those three organizations function in different, in sort of different aspects of a global financial cartel. And what John Perkins describes in his book is how those banking establishments, first they serve to attempt to control foreign nations through offering loans that they'll never be able to repay back. And they'll promise things like, we'll develop your freeway system, we'll develop hydroelectric dams, we'll do all these amazing development projects and modernize your country. And this has been done over and over and over, from Mexico to Africa,
North Korea, we did under the Clinton administration.
Exactly. And so you get these countries hooked on loans that they can't repay with promises of grandeur and modernization. And once they're hooked on those loans, then you own them financially. But what John Perkins describes is that sometimes countries will resist because they'll understand the financial nature of what they're being offered as being actually quite predatory. And for anyone that doesn't take those sort of financial incentives to come under the fold, that's when they start to send smear campaigns, slander. They start to infiltrate people, and if that doesn't work, then they send what John Perkins describes as the jackals, which are assassins, usually CIA or some other,
like Saddam or Gaddafi.
Exactly. John Perkins specifically talks about his work in Central America, but Gaddafi and Saddam are great examples, and there are many around the world. And that book, I highly recommend it to anyone who has not read it. And so I'm not trying to say that Mark Carney is directly involved in some plot to assassinate foreign leaders. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is that there is a distinct departure from a classic Canadian banker's career path, and Oxford stands out to me in that path. Is if he's first off, he graduated from Harvard in 1988, I see, with a bachelor's degree and high honors. And this is a frequent pattern you see amongst these globalist sort of golden boys, is that they'll get an Ivy League education in the States, and then if they're bound for this globalist track, they'll often go over to a Princeton or an Oxford or one of these other international Ivy Leaguers, and that starts to associate them with the international scene and with this Bank of England scene. So once you notice the Oxford University on his resume, it's not as surprising that he then gets involved as the governor of the Bank of England. But it is a very clear trend that this guy might not be all that he seems to be. And
Sure.
So when I see that, I think it's time to dig.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Sunday Night Live. I am Chase Geiser, your host for the next 1 hour, joined by the legendary, infamous now, Ian Carroll. And we are frantically digging through the details, trying to figure out what the deal is with this Mark Carney thing. Ian, as I understand, hasn't been looking at the news today because I know how important it is to take a day or two off every once in a while. And he was surprised to see some of the details in this Wikipedia page about Mark Carney. What have you found so far, just glancing through it and highlighting?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's cool to note at first is that it's kind of cool to be doing this live on air, actually, because even the most esteemed journalists out there still go through the same exact process as anyone at home would if they wanted to learn something. Is you start with the basics, and I mean, Wikipedia is a very surface level sourcing, but it's not a bad place to start if you don't know anything. And if you scroll through that and you kind of start to dig into what are the sources on the claims made there, you can start to really start to drill down and find some keywords and keep your searching going. And so I often start on Wikipedia to get myself going. And when you look at his overview, I mean, you start out with a pretty classic banker's career, which, remember, we're not hiring to be a banker. We're hiring him to be the leader of Canada. ostensibly. So it's an interesting choice, and it's not a surprising one that they choose a banker first off. But then when you look through his banking resume, it goes from like the typical Oxford University to Goldman Sachs to Bank of Canada, and that's all relatively expected. And then the governor of the Bank of England jumps out at you as a distinct departure from that Canadian, like kind of North American trend. And the moment I see the governor of the Bank of England, I start to have questions. You mentioned earlier several of these globalist organizations, the WEF and the Bilderberg Group, being a little bit deeper down in this document, and
G7 too.
Yeah, and so that starts to get me really thinking about what exactly is going on up in Canada, and how is Trump going to deal with this?
Tell me a little bit about what you know about the Bank of England and the International Bank of Settlements.
So a lot of what I know specifically about the Bank of England is based on their sort of founding history, their history through the 1800s, 1900s. And the thing about the International Bank of Settlements, there's sort of this trifecta going on. And anyone who's read Confessions of an Economic Hitman will be familiar with the system to a certain extent. That's written by John Perkins, who is a famous CIA operative that is now basically a whistleblower on how this financial cartel works on the global scale, where it's been put in place slowly over time, and the details are extremely complex. But between the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the International Bank of Settlements, those three organizations function in different, in sort of different aspects of a global financial cartel. And what John Perkins describes in his book is how those banking establishments, first, they serve to attempt to control foreign nations through offering loans that they'll never be able to repay back. And they'll promise things like, we'll develop your freeway systems, we'll develop hydroelectric dams, we'll do all these amazing development projects and modernize your country. And this has been done over and over and over, from Mexico to Africa,
North Korea,
Asia.
we did under the Clinton administration.
Exactly. And so you get these countries hooked on loans that they can't repay, with promises of grandeur and modernization. And once they're hooked on those loans, then you own them financially. But what John Perkins describes is that sometimes countries will resist because they'll understand the financial nature of what they're being offered as being actually quite predatory. And for anyone that doesn't take those sort of financial incentives to come under the fold, that's when they start to send smear campaigns, slander. They start to infiltrate people. And if that doesn't work, then they send what John Perkins describes as the jackals, which are assassins, usually CIA or some other,
like Saddam or Gaddafi.
Exactly. John Perkins specifically talks about his work in Central America, but Gaddafi and Saddam are great examples. And there are many around the world. And that book, I highly recommend it to anyone who has not read it. And so I'm not trying to say that Mark Carney is directly involved in some plot to assassinate foreign leaders. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is that there is a distinct departure from a classic Canadian banker's career path. And Oxford stands out to me in that path. Is if he's first off, he graduated from Harvard in 1988, I see, with a bachelor's degree and high honors. And this is a frequent pattern you see amongst these globalist sort of golden boys, is that they'll get an Ivy League education in the States. And then if they're bound for this globalist track, they'll often go over to a Princeton or an Oxford or one of these other international Ivy Leaguers. And that starts to associate them with the international scene and with this Bank of England scene. So once you notice the Oxford University on his resume, it's not as surprising that he then gets involved as the governor of the Bank of England. But it is a very clear trend that this guy might not be all that he seems to be. And so when I see that, I think it's time to dig.
Well, and the Crown is heavily invested for a number of reasons, as I understand it, in Canada. I'm told, I don't know if this is true or not, Ian, but I'm told that the Crown still owns a substantial portion of land in Canada as well. Though I haven't looked into it because it hasn't been something it hasn't been relevant enough for me to look into as of yet. Now it seems to be. But it's interesting to me that there was this lateral shift from the Bank of Canada to the Bank of England, given how connected Canada and England are to one another. And like I said, we don't know anything about them yet. We haven't found anything because we've just been looking for 10 minutes that we can condemn him with. But it's very alarming that some of the world's supervillain organizations have selected him as a great candidate for leadership, from the WEF to G7 to Bilderberg to these major banks to the International Monetary Fund. I mean, this it's alarming that he seems like their pony boy.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that he didn't just wind up at these very prestigious financial institutions with positions near the top of power, but he did it at very
critical moments
in history. So he was the governor of the Bank of Canada from 2008 to 2013. That is a direct, if you're getting put in charge of the Bank of Canada in 2008, your job is to manage the fallout of the 2008 banking crisis. And then he winds up as the governor of the Bank of England across the years of Brexit. So this guy has clearly been groomed for this role to a certain extent, selected for these positions, and he's done well enough that he has climbed the ranks to now being what appears to be sort of installed by a uniparty perspective into the PM of Canada.
Klaus Schwab famously said, "We have infiltrated the cabinet." Has even cited Justin Trudeau, but that whole entire party, basically the entire political establishment of Canada, has been infiltrated by the WEF and other globalist institutions, as far as I can tell, minus the minority opposition leadership and some of the others that we've seen kind of go viral that seem to be begging for Canadian sovereignty again. But it's interesting that this is coming out, that they've selected this person. And by they, I don't mean the Canadian people. I mean, they have selected this person in the context of Trump announcing the establishment of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. He simultaneously, earlier in this term, signed an executive order, I believe, that made central bank digital currencies illegal, if I am correct. And you've had this International Monetary Fund, these globalist bankers that have really been pushing for a CBDC for an extended period of time. And they've been touting all the benefits and convenience of it. But with blockchain technology, just as it can be weaponized for good, it can also be weaponized for evil and control. We've seen how China has done this by only allowing people to spend so much of their own money on resources, whether it's food or other things. There's a whole lot of tracking that can be installed in the back door of it as well. And so I wonder if this selection is really part of a greater economic war between globalism and national sovereignty and the dollar and a central bank digital currency, Ian.
Funny that you mentioned that, because I am currently highlighting a pretty relevant sentence to that. There's a couple of things I'm noticing here in his economic policy history. And obviously, again, this is just a very cursory, like Wikipedia is cursory, but it's a good starting point. And here we have a direct reference to his relationship to Donald Trump's policies. Speaking just hours after U.S. President Donald Trump posted a tweet blaming Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell's policies for creating fears of an economic recession and threatening China with more retaliatory tariffs, Carney urged central banks to collaborate in replacing the U.S. dollar as reserve currency. He cautioned against choosing another new hegemonic reserve currency, and suggested instead a new synthetic hegemonic currency. Whoa, that is a heck of a phrase to choose. A synthetic hegemonic currency, or SHC. And you can tell that this guy is
a shitcoin.
Yeah. You can tell this guy's really good with his words, because the other thing that I've highlighted at the top of the page here under wealth inequalities is that actually in 2011, this is in the fallout from the 2008 financial crisis. It says that Carney referred to the Occupy Wall Street protests as entirely constructive, which is not what you would expect from a central banker. And it takes a second to think about this. This is a central banker that is playing the side of Occupy Wall Street, saying, yeah, these guys are actually, they bring up great points. We should bring down pay gaps between CEOs and workers. We really are hearing the people of our nations. And to me, that screams highly advanced political operative, because clearly a guy with a resume of banking of this high of a profile, he's not working on behalf of the workers of this world. But that rhetoric is exactly what I would expect to hear from a high level political operative that is designed to sound like he is working on behalf of workers of this world, right? And so it's interesting when you connect that statement to these statements about Donald Trump's policies and how he's urging a movement away from U.S. digital or U.S. currencies and towards a global hegemonic, synthetic hegemonic. Who chooses the word hegemonic?
Why would you name a voting machine company Dominion?
Exactly. It's a little disconcerting. If anyone's not familiar with this word, hegemonic is from the root word hegemony. And hegemony, you should look it up. It's not a good thing. And I'm very baffled as to who would ever choose to include that term in the actual branding of your currency.
That's really alarming and fascinating. That's probably the topic of conversation in the coming weeks. I mean, this is a huge story, I think. And one of the things I mentioned before you came on, Ian, that I want to mention, throw at you is Trudeau was totally a globalist puppet, but nobody took him seriously. Not even his own people took him seriously. The international community didn't take him seriously. The United States didn't take him seriously with his funny socks and his crossed legs and his just effeminate kind of mannerisms. Even there's that famous clip of him trying to talk to Xi Jinping and Xi Jinping just kind of writing him off. There's example after example of this. And so the problem for Canada, for these globalists, wasn't that Justin Trudeau was going against them, it was that he had no leverage, right? So if Justin Trudeau wants to leverage a globalist or international support for a movement in Canada, they would just be like, get the fuck out of here, whatever, pretty boy.
Yep.
But this guy can basically make Canada a proxy for the globalist agenda in a way that our CIA and the European Union have made Ukraine a proxy for a war on Russia. So Canada is not just a weak Justin Trudeau, complaining to its big older brother to no avail. Now it has become weaponized by the globalists, as it appears.
That is the thing that is starting to concern me when I'm reading this, is that this feels like when someone concerning moves into town and then suddenly like a CIA agent moves in next to them. That's kind of how this feels, is that Donald Trump is making some moves that maybe the global banking system. I mean, let's be clear. I actually think that Donald Trump is unfortunately walking us dangerously close to a global hegemonic currency type of situation. I'm not exactly excited about Donald Trump's take.
What do you mean? Can you explain that a little bit?
Donald Trump has been doing a lot of things, and I still need to do a lot more digging to really flesh these ideas out. But Donald Trump has a lot of great policies and promises about things like taxes, things like tariffs, things that affect us directly that we can understand. But simultaneous to all of that, Donald Trump has a lot of rhetoric that is concerning about digital currencies, about digital surveillance. He's making friends with people like Larry Ellison, who, when Larry Ellison came out and gave this famous speech on like day 2 of the Trump administration about synthetic mRNA vaccines, that was extremely concerning to a lot of Americans, a lot of Trump voters, for plenty of reasons. But aside from the mRNA and the medical side of things, which Larry Ellison has no business being in as far as I'm concerned, Larry Ellison is famous for his really despotic statements after 9/11 about how a surveillance state is good for everyone and about how great it will be when we can surveil every American at all times, essentially, and pushing for Patriot Act stuff.
Yeah, they called it the Patriot Act because they spied on patriots.
Bingo. And so Donald Trump, as a journalist, it's important for us always to remember that even when we get, if what we think is our guy, our job as journalists is to hold the powerful to account. And Donald Trump has done a lot of things that I do like, but he also has a lot of policies when it comes to the digital world and a lot of these parts of the world that he might not understand as well as younger people, like AI, like robotics, like cryptocurrencies and such. That's where I worry that Donald Trump, even if he has the best of intentions, which I don't know his intentions, I worry that he could be manipulated by very intelligent technocrats that are younger than him and that have connections, people like Larry Fink, people like Larry Ellison. And I worry that Mark Carney fits the bill of another handler type of person moving in next door to the United States, just as we're having all this momentum towards what feels a lot like a revolution.
It seems like a pull to reinstate support for central bank digital currencies to me.
Certainly.
And here's the deal with that. That's so alarming about that. The problem is the dollar isn't real. It's a Ponzi scheme and it's a lie. And so there's no way within the system to fix the system. You have to transcend the Ponzi scheme in order to rectify it. And it's painful to do something like that. When it comes out that a Ponzi scheme is a Ponzi scheme, the first thing that happens is it collapses. And then there's fallout, and then there's a reset, for lack of a better term. I know that word has accrued a lot of negative connotations over the years. Now, what I believe is that the political class, the global political class, Ian, has reached a point where it understands that the end of the Ponzi scheme that is the dollar as a fiat currency is near. Before, it was indefinite when it would happen. So the policy was to kick the can. Now they're like, all right, we're arriving at this place where the collapse is inevitable and the kicking the can thing isn't going to work much longer. And so what we have to do is, before the collapse happens, we have to set up the policies and the infrastructure for the post-collapse economy. And that's why there's this huge push for central bank digital currency and all these policies that were advocated, because if the dollar collapses, people everywhere are going to demand a solution immediately. If the globalists have the first solution, if they're the first to market and they have all the leverage and power and influence, then they can usher in this basically new world order, globalist agenda. And so when Trump's coming out and he's trying to fix the dollar, fix the economy, establish sovereignty, and simultaneously shut down the globalist economy agenda that they had planned for the post-collapse world, then that's when they have to push back, because no matter how good Trump's policies are within the context of a Ponzi scheme, at the end of the day, it's still a Ponzi scheme.
Yep.
So how do you get the dollar to not be a fiat currency without major disruption? Because I mean, if you go to Grok right now, I don't mean to rant. If you go to Grok or ChatGPT and you ask what would happen if the United States paid all of its debt off in one day and passed a balanced budget forever into the future, it describes a cacophony, a cornucopia full of economic disaster after economic disaster, because the system itself is dependent on debt. That's what fractional reserve banking is. That's what loaning money on interest is. If there's only $100,000 that exists and you loan that $100,000 with 10% interest, there's officially not enough money in the world to pay you back. There's more debt than there is money. So anyway, I know that was a rant, but
no, it's a perfect rant, because there's no better time than now to talk about the fundamentals of money and to do it in a way that actually matters and is relevant to today, because the concept of debt inherently is borrowing from the future, right?
Right.
And when you start borrowing from the future in year one, you're only 1 year deep into this bad decision that you could theoretically still unwind. But when you've been doing it for 100 years, 200 years, when you've done it through multiple different iterations of a global reserve currency, you start to get into a situation, like you're saying, where an unwind actually is a catastrophe. And we are all, as a species together, faced with this question of how do we actually build a better economic future that is not based in crime and Ponzi schemes and debt. And the answer is, I don't know if anyone really has an answer to that. And that's pretty concerning to me, because we clearly have these globalist organizations chomping at the bit to essentially lock us into a digital financial slavery of some sorts.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to
neo-serfdom.
tell. Yeah, exactly. It's really hard to tell the difference between people that are actually megalomaniacal maniacs, like on the path towards trying to dominate the world, versus those that are just trying to explore logical, real digital currency concepts. Because I would hope that, digital currency is already here and it's coming even more, whether we like it or not. The question is, will it become an open market system where citizens are free to choose the currencies they want to use, where they can have some of their money in Bitcoin, they can have some of their money in shitcoins, they can have some of their money in central bank digital currencies, whatever it is that people choose. An economy of choice, I think, is inherently one of the best versions. It's the best version that I understand today. And I'm always trying to learn more. And I think that the worst possible scenario is an economy without choice, where we are forced to use a centralized system where either it's one digital currency, that'd be the worst, or potentially the same exact thing is where you have an ecosystem of digital currencies that are actually really just different name brands for the exact same concept. And that is what I'm starting to see in here. I actually highlighted this quote where, it's not a quote of him, it's a quote from Wikipedia, where they're talking about how Carney urged central banks to collaborate in replacing the US dollar as reserve currency. He cautioned against choosing another hegemonic reserve currency like the renminbi. I'm exposing that I don't have enough global financial literacy, nearly enough. But he suggested instead this new synthetic hegemonic currency such as Libra. And Libra was the shitcoin that Javier Milei tweeted out to his entire country once, just a couple weeks ago, and then it rug pulled, and then he deleted the tweet and pretended that it didn't happen, and then later that same day, he did it again, and it rug pulled again.
Wow.
So I have some serious concerns, and I need to. So one thing that's very important when you're looking on Wikipedia is you cannot trust it as gospel. And when you see something that is that concerning, like the concept of a new synthetic hegemonic currency tied to the idea of Libra coin, there's a citation for that. There's actually 3 citations for that. And so when I get home, I'm clicking on 95, 96, and 97 on this Wikipedia article in order to dig into the sources that are making these claims so that I can better understand the context of what this means. Because it could be a bit of a nothing burger, or it could be the whole enchilada. And it's really important for us to start to understand that as quickly as possible, because it sounds like this guy's about to be our neighbor.
Well, one of the things that has been so powerful about having the dollar as the global reserve currency is it's given our government superpower status over the economy of the world ever since the 1950s. And it's one of the reasons why the Russias and the Irans and the Chinas hate us so much, because when we have a disagreement with Iran, what we do is we freeze all the dollars that they have. Since they have to trade oil in dollars, they have to have dollars in banks. And if a dollar is in banks, that means that the US can freeze it. And we control through our sanctions and our economic policy the behaviors of these countries and what they do. And the problem is, with a central bank digital currency, yes, digital currencies are built on a blockchain, and blockchain technology is famous, and it's honestly famous, truly famous for its decentralized features. You can track everything. There's a lack of fraud that can be conducted. I mean, it's incredibly secure. It's amazing. It's like a self-sustaining, almost invisible arm, like Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations thing.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the decentralized aspect of blockchain technology is antithetical to the name central bank digital currency. How can it be central and decentralized at the same time? So what's happening is you have this globalist push to take away the power of the United States having centralized control over the world's economy with the dollar as the global reserve currency. They're advocating for a decentralized currency, but operated and controlled by a central bank that's globalist. So what we have here is the globalist community trying to control the world's economy by committee at the expense of the American people. And in order to justify it, there has to be a total collapse of our dollar. So it seems to me an international conspiracy to just wreck the dollar anywhere, any way possible in order to justify ushering in this entire new economic system, which is literally centralized in the name, though it espouses its decentralized technologies.
You bring up the most important point for every person around the world to understand about digital currencies today. And that's the difference between just the concept of blockchain and the concept of decentralized blockchains, right? And what we're witnessing here, what you're talking about, is hijacking the blockchain part and pretending like you're bringing the decentralized part with it. But those are not the same thing, and they do not have to operate together. Blockchain is simply the technology, the chaining technology that makes it so that the transactions are immutable and traceable forever. And that is actually the most dystopian part, is that is the part that makes everything trackable, everything traceable, and everything visible to everybody. And so that is where digital surveillance comes in. Decentralization is not inherently part of the blockchain technology. Decentralization is when everyone all around the world is a part of hosting it, a part of creating it, a part of utilizing. That's not necessarily coming along for the ride. And it really feels like they're trying to do the bait and switch, where they make it sound like they're ushering in this great new crypto era of decentralized currencies. But what they're really doing is they're leaving the decentralized behind, and they're trying to bring us into a centralized blockchain world, which is the ultimate technocratic nightmare. And I hope, I pray that we have enough crypto people in this world by now that are educated enough, that have built enough decentralized blockchain technologies that are robust and function, that they can become that resistance against having only centralized options in the future. And I think the most frightening future possible proclamation from bankers, from government, from politicians would be for them to start talking about outlawing these decentralized cryptocurrencies, these meme coins, because as much as meme coins are ridiculous and generally fraudulent, it is an important reminder that that freedom to do all those things, part of that freedom is what protects our ability to have decentralized cryptocurrencies.
Well, and all this comes in the context of the fact that China has been mining its own gold for years and years and inaccurately reporting the amount of gold that it has mined. Nobody really knows how much gold China has had. While it's mining its own gold, it's importing record numbers of gold. This is all happening at the same time that President Trump and Elon Musk are all of a sudden just decided they want to go to Fort Knox to see if we have any gold.
Yep.
And all in the context of this Russia-Ukraine war escalation and Russia really catalyzing BRICS as an alternative to the dollar. And then this escalation now suddenly this week with we're about ready to go to war with Iran, which is clearly only over the dollar if you really look at the base of it, because we have to ensure that oil is traded in dollars in the Middle East in order to protect the dollar as a global reserve currency, because it creates artificial demand for a currency that's otherwise worthless. And so we've got World War III about ready to bust out in Iran, and we have the globalist community literally fighting not alongside the United States, but against the United States to establish dominance in a post-collapse world. So what we have to do is we have to stop the collapse from happening, or postpone it long enough for us to, kind of like in Indiana Jones when he puts the sandbag on over the statue as he takes it to try to trick the system. Like, we have to figure out a way to slide in a new system when we take out the old one without the entire temple just collapsing on Indiana Jones.
I mean, the beautiful part of what you're saying is that I believe, this is my perspective, that in some ways we actually are already prepared. And in some ways we already have the systems we would need in order to withstand this globalist sort of a takeover. And really the best example of that is Bitcoin. And the The Bitcoin network is time tested and proven to be a decentralized blockchain technology, and it does not fulfill all of our needs, but it certainly is the gold standard model for what those needs represent and how you think about them. And the only thing, the tragic irony of it all is that what's stopping us from having a decentralized option in this technocratic future is not that it hasn't been invented. It's that not enough people might know about it and how to use it and how to access it. Because the only thing stopping regular people from utilizing decentralized blockchain technologies today is just understanding them.
Sure.
And the unfortunate truth is that when you're offered two options, one of which is complex and requires you to understand your keys and understand all the security needs of how a thing like Bitcoin works, understanding the way it works, how to access it, how to trade it, how to use it, that's not super easy. And if you're given the option between that and, oh, here's an app on your phone that looks exactly like your banking app and it uses these simple coins, you just press the button and it's just so easy. That is the danger, is that the easy version will be the central bank digital currency that will be, it will.
They'll get the Visas and the MasterCards and all the major banks to agree to allow. Look, you might be using your credit card just like you were before, but all that infrastructure is in place at these major banking institutions. So it would be this new currency behind it on the other end.
And they can very quickly tie that to digital IDs, as you need your digital ID in order to have a bank account, in order to have these services. And we are very quickly worried about walking into the exact traps that so many people have been warning us all about for so long.
Folks, we're coming up on our
Not new, what I do. I've been at it for a minute, pursuing, doing the damage new. I would do everything that I said I would do. I gotta have it, so goddamn it, I'ma be everything I'm